Welcome to Roll to Save, the RPG history podcast. Tale of the Manticore.
Hello and welcome to a special episode of Roll to Save. We're very fortunate because this week we are joined by John, who is the host and writer of the Tale of the Manticore podcast. John, welcome. We're very glad to have you here.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. I've been a fan of your show for a long, long time, and I'm absolutely thrilled to finally get to talk to you face to face.
Well, likewise, I'm a massive fan of Tale of the Manticore. I've been following it since the beginning. Incredibly jealous of the fact that you managed to do the movie trailer guy voice. That is a very impressive feat. Sadly, we have nothing quite so gravelly on Roll to Save. But I'm going to ask you the same question I ask everyone that we get on the show, and that is namely, how did you start in the role-playing hobby? What was your first game? What really got you into it all?
I'm one of those folks that picked up basic D&D. This is like a little bit before the Red Box came out, probably 1983. I think I was 11 or 12 years old. I'm a little fuzzy on it. My brother got a copy of the set. For some reason, he allowed me to play in his game. It changed my life to like that artwork, that Errol Otis artwork, the Jeff D stuff, Morgan Ironwolf, the cover alone, all of that stuff just completely was the perfect crack for my 11-year-old brain. I didn't understand the game at all because my understanding of games up until then was, like Monopoly or chess or checkers or whatever. I didn't have a concept of a game that could exist without turns being taken or even a non-competitive game. But I knew that whatever the stuff was, the trappings of the game were just, to my mind, absolute perfect drug. And so I was hooked, and spent a ton of time playing, but not just playing, but also just kind of daydreaming about the stuff, reading modules that I would never play. I read so many more of those little module packets that you used to be able to buy, played some of them, but mostly just read them, and it's sort of in my imagination. I think I did a lot more gameplay in my imagination than I did actually in real life. And then it started to wane a little bit when I was a teenager. Are we around the same age? I'm in my late 40s. You look younger than me.
I'm in my mid 40s. Just
There we go. So I'm the senior. You must respect me.
Having a teenager, I know that's not the case at all.
Okay. Anyway, so in my teenage years, you will remember this. There was the Satanic Panic, Mazes and Monsters, all that stuff. And for any of your listeners that were there, they know how true this is. And for any that weren't there, believe you me, it was about the worst thing you could admit to being was a Dungeons and Dragons player. It was deeply, deeply shameful. And so those of us that played, most of us were closet D&D players. And I did have a group of friends. We were not friends in school. We all went to the same school, but we weren't friends. We probably didn't say hello in the halls. But we would meet at one of my buddies' places who had moved out, lived in an apartment. It was filthy, empty pizza boxes everywhere. Everything smelled like shoes, whether it was shoes or not. And we would play D&D there together. But eventually the stigma became so powerful and unavoidable that I just gave up and chose having a girlfriend over playing role-playing games, because that was definitely the choice. You could listen to heavy metal and still have a girlfriend, but you couldn't listen to heavy metal, play D&D, and still have a girlfriend. That was just not acceptable. Anyway, so I gave up the hobby, and I gave it up for decades, actually. And I still would read the novels, and when the Lord of the Rings movies came out, I was really excited about that. And then when Game of Thrones came out, I was really excited about that. But I never came back to the table because in my mind, that stigma was always there. It was very, very sort of private, internal passion for me. Never went away, actually, never went away. Always loved the genre, I guess is the word. But then actually was doing the podcast, and strangely enough, the pandemic that actually brought me back to a game. I'm in my first game now. I finally gave in and joined up with Roll20. That's the first game I've played in over 20 years.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's, you know what? It's great. It's great. I wish I hadn't waited.
I have done more role playing this year than I have done in the last decade, probably combined. And again, a combination of the pandemic and just tools like Roll20 that are available now. We were talking about in our last podcast, but I've done 250 hours up to the end of this year.
It was your last episode. I don't know when this one's going to come out, but in that particular episode, you were saying you can't wait to give them your money, right? You're like, please take it. Please take it.
We should point out there are other platforms. Roll20 is just one of many, Fantasy Grounds, all that good stuff. I use Roll20 with my group mainly because I think I'm now at that age where I found one, I'm like, okay, I vaguely understand this. I'm not going to bother muddying the water by trying other things, but it makes it so easy. I would not have conceived of this even a decade ago, of being able to play. It was always very much you have to get people around the table and sit in a musty room. Your experiences of the Satanic Panic are interesting because when I talk to people from North America around about the same age, they all have gone through that experience of it was stigmatized. You've got a kind of very far right religious movement just going after it with money and with lawyers and all sorts of things. And in the UK, we had that, but to a much lesser degree. I remember when I would have been probably about 11 years old, and fighting fantasy books were a massive craze in my school. And those are the choose your own adventure style ones produced by the guys who eventually went on to make Games Workshop. And they were little mini role-playing games. You threw some dice, except we never threw dice because we were massive cheats and just assumed that we blazed through every fight. But I remember one parents' night, and my parents came home kind of incensed because our teacher had told all the parents that she believed these books were evil and we shouldn't be reading them. I cannot imagine a teacher nowadays telling parents that they want the children to learn less.
Oh my God. I remember that when I was a kid, our teachers would say, you can read anything you want for a book report, whatever it was. You can read anything you want except Stephen King. I remember it so clearly. It was like the Wikipedia of the 80s. You can use any website to research you want except for Wikipedia. Back then it was Stephen King. He was just considered schlock and, it was tasteless. Nowadays, I think he's finally kind of recognized as a kind of a, genius.
I think Stephen King probably does not care. He's probably just sitting there lighting a cigar with a $50 note somewhere going, okay, yeah, tasteless, whatever. So you've kind of answered this question already, but what drove you to create the Tale of the Manticore podcast? It's a bit different from other actual plays, but I'll let you get into that in a minute.
It kind of happened a little bit by accident, kind of by accident. So as I mentioned, while I was not playing D&D, I was still really sort of in my mind still loved all of that stuff. And so I would read the novels and watch the Game of Thrones and all that stuff. And then I discovered that podcasts also had this particular genre represented. And so I discovered the Adventure Zone. And have you listened to that one yet?
I've not listened to it yet, no.
Trust me. It's a bit of a life changer. It literally was a life changer for me. They do a gonzo comedy D&D thing, which is just a bunch of really funny guys improving over their D&D game. There's very little D&D in it. It's so good, but not just funny. They really achieve like some emotionally impactful episodes, and the story itself is very brilliantly crafted, especially considering that it was kind of procedurally generated. It wasn't, I think a lot of it was kind of done in the Lost. Remember Lost? It was sort of like they kept on adding complexity. And by the end of it, you're like, is this going to resolve in a brilliant way? Well, it didn't.
No.
But the Adventure Zone does. They managed to make all of the strangeness make sense in the most amazing way. Anyway, so I was inspired by that, and I started thinking, maybe there's more. Maybe there's more. I'll listen to these all day long. They're so good. And so I started looking, but I didn't find them. I found a lot of imitators for the Adventure Zone. There are a lot. There's a vast ocean of actual plays that want to be improv comedy, but at least to me, and I qualify it by, to each his own taste, to me, they're not funny. There's a lot that are just kind of ridiculous, but to me, ridiculous doesn't equal funny. They're not maybe clever. They're just a little bit weird or zany. They use words like shenanigans and hijinks a lot. Those are usually, they set off alarms for me. Anyway, I don't want to take a giant crap off or other people's podcasts. They're obviously very, very popular and a lot of people love them, but I didn't. So I was going through a half a dozen a day, and I would just sort of audition them. And when it came time for the zany comedy, if it didn't land, delete for me. And eventually, by accident, I found one that was another life changer. It was the Iron Realm. It's certainly known, I think, in like the solo play kind of world. And I listened to it, and it was basically my childhood game played out, and there was dramatization as well. And I thought, this is fantastic. There's nothing like this. This is amazing. And so I started looking for more like that. Didn't find them. Basically, that was it. The guy, Abel Enzo, who runs that show, he's basically an island, right? No one else really doing that. And so being unable to find more, but wanting more, eventually I just came to the decision to make it. And so I made the version of Abel's show that I was searching for the whole time, or at least I tried to. A lot of things kind of emerged as I was learning the ropes of podcasting. I'm sure you've had the same experience. When you start out, you know a little, yeah. And then after a while, you get better. So although I'm not like ashamed of my earlier episodes, with one exception, we can come back to that later. It definitely, my later stuff is better as I kind of get it, as I kind of understand, oh, okay, I can do this and I can do this. This works, this doesn't work. Anyway, so that's how I came to making the podcast. And also I had a background as a studio engineer and as a musician. I don't hate the sound of my own voice recorded. A lot of people do. Actually, I hate my own singing voice. I hate it. I can't stand to listen to it. But my speaking voice, I'm at least okay with. And I've heard other people have said to me, oh, you have a kind of a radio kind of voice. It all kind of came together. There were no reasons for me to say no. It's kind of like, well, I always wanted to kind of write a novel, but I never did. I'm looking for a podcast that's a certain thing, and I can't find it. I have some audio skills. I have some really nice equipment in terms of microphones and stuff. There's no reason not to do this. And then the pandemic came, and boom, suddenly I had all the time in the world to do it. Actually, at first I was trying to do it on the sly. I didn't tell my partner I was doing it. Could you imagine making a podcast in secret? Like, it's ridiculous. But I tried, and I was trying to record with my phone in my classroom. I'm a high school teacher. After class, I would try and record episodes and sort of write after school. And it was not working very well, and it was certainly much too slow. And eventually, when the pandemic came and we were all just sort of indoors all the time, I was like, I have time, equipment, a burning desire to do this, but I can't do it because my partner's here. So suddenly I just broke down one day and I said, listen, I have to drop a bomb. And then I told her I was into role-playing games, and she said, yeah, I know.
Yeah, well, my wife has tolerated me for many, many moons. And I think when I told her that I was going to do a podcast about the history of RPGs, it was almost just this is just the latest badge of shame that you're adding to your collection. You have a glass cabinet filled with tiny painted plastic figures downstairs. You're a grown man. This is probably the least shameful thing you've done. Go for it. Enjoy yourself.
I love the slant that you have on this kind of podcast, because obviously there are a lot of us doing RPG podcasts, but I think you've also really found a niche where there's really no one else doing what you do. And so I think you've really got something there. I think you've really cracked onto something good with what you do. And actually, I've noticed you've branched out as well over time too, right? So now you're starting to include more interviews and include more. I think you're thinking about doing something with Paranoia. You should do it.
Yes. So it goes back to actually what you're saying about zany. So I interviewed Alan Varney, who is one of the designers for Paranoia XP, which is, in my opinion, the best edition of Paranoia. He also wrote a lot of the adventures during the glory days of Paranoia in first and second edition. And one of the things that Alan said, which I was very glad he said, because if he hadn't said it, I would feel horrible interviewing him, but was he really hated the direction that Paranoia took when it became wacky and zany. Paranoia's early humour is actually very dark. If you think of Terry Gilliam's Brazil, that is what Paranoia really is at its essence. And the games that I run of Paranoia are like that. There's people who will not like them because they like games where people throw custard pies at each other, and I don't particularly find that funny. And so I run games that tend to be a bit darker, but they're still dark. Doesn't necessarily mean boring. And I've always thought that would be great as an actual play podcast. The reason being, Paranoia is never a campaign. I've run about just over a dozen games of Paranoia since the pandemic started, and we've probably done about 6 different adventures, but not with the same characters, not with the same continuation, because Paranoia does not have a happy ending. It's been nice because the players themselves, I've been dropping in little continuity links so they'll hear something happening in another sector, which they know full well is their idiocy from a previous game. But there's no link. They don't go there. They don't see what happens. But then they've started dropping things in themselves with completely different characters and saying, oh yeah, I saw in the news that this thing happened in CHN sector. I wonder what's happening over there. And they'll have a little chuckle to themselves because they know it's an in-joke. It takes away from the zaniness and the wackiness. And I've tried to find Paranoia actual play, and everything I've seen either on YouTube or on the podcast has been crazy shenanigans. Join us as our wacky troubleshooters engage with Daleks with a Mexican accent. You're like,
no,
exactly. That's not for me. So yes, I'm considering doing an Ocean's 11 and getting a team together to pull off a Paranoia actual play with the proviso that they can all drop out after one adventure because
you should and as you say, if they are kind of geared towards shorter campaigns or even not even campaigns but sort of one shot type things, then you can do it as an experiment.
I do this because I'm getting older and my attention span gets shorter. I love short episodes. That's one reason I love your podcast. It's the perfect length for me. I can listen to it between a call or if I'm going to the garage or whatever, and I get the whole thing through. I don't have to listen to you 1.5 times speed. With one game session, I could get maybe 6 half-hour episodes out of that, and that would be a nice little thing. So that's bubbling away in the back of my mind. This is not about me and my strange dreams of what I want to do with podcasting. One of the questions I would ask you about Tale of the Manticore is, how would you describe it to somebody who has never listened to it before?
I've been asked this before, and I usually mess it up. I usually mess up the answer really bad. I'm gonna go for it again. Ready? Okay. Stepping up to the plate. Essentially, what Tale of the Manticore is, first of all, it's OSR. It's Dungeons and Dragons, kind of circa Redbox. It is solo play, kind of. It is just me for the most part. And it's narrated. So how can I say? Have you ever had like a game where you, at the end of it, you thought, well, this would make a good book? I've had that, and I've almost come close to making that book. Tale of the Manticore is kind of like that, except that it wasn't a game that happened and then a story that was written. I'm playing the game as I write a narration. So I guess a regular game of D&D takes place in the second person. Like, what do you do? And then the characters say, like, you enter a room, you see this, you see that. And then the characters are kind of in that first person. Oh, I do this, I do that. Tale of the Manticore is third person, like a novel. And so it'll say, like, the characters by name, they walk into a hall, they see this, or this happens, and then they react. So I'm playing Dungeon Master and the characters, but it's still a game. It's a D&D game. So whenever there's a combat, dice are rolled. Whenever there's an element of chance, dice are rolled. I use the same tables that a DM would use, like wandering encounter tables. Every now and then I come across a conflict between what I know as a DM and what the characters would know. But it hasn't actually been that big of a conflict because I can always ask myself, would the characters know this? And if they don't, then they just act as they would according to what knowledge they have. It's dark fantasy. There's really no comedy in Tale of the Manticore. It is solo play. It is about 60 to 70% narration, like a novel, and 30% gameplay. But really what it is in its core is a D&D game that happens very, very, very slowly at the speed of typing, actually. Because as I sit at a keyboard and type out the gameplay, that's the speed that it comes out. I once had a listener ask if he could get the files, the video or audio files of the original game. And I had to write, I didn't understand it first. And then I did. And I wrote back, oh, there is no original game. The podcast did. That is the game. That is the game. The script, I guess, is written simultaneously to the game playing. It's what's the word? Procedural? Emergent? Yeah. It's kind of, I call it sandbox fiction. I don't know what else to call it. It's hard to describe because there's almost nothing else like it that I know of. There's a couple of things. I mentioned the Iron Realm that's similar and certainly has been a big inspiration for me. Do you know Trevor Duvall's Me, Myself, and Die?
I've heard of it, yes.
On YouTube. That's kind of similar. It's a story and a game that are happening always at the sort of at the edge of the storytelling. The storyteller doesn't know any more than the listener, I guess is a way of putting it.
You've mentioned that it's OSR.
Uh-huh.
What dictated then your choice of system? Because you say it's almost Redbox D&D or circa Redbox.
Almost, with a couple of hacks. Yeah. It's OSR because I feel that Rules Light works well for a podcast. So it just works for the medium. And Rules Heavy, I don't want to listen to somebody explaining too much. I'm happy to hear somebody explaining a little bit. Every now and then I have a concern that the listening audience will be too young to really want to follow the basic rules. Maybe they won't be interested in basic D&D. And so I'm always kind of crossing my fingers and hoping that they'll give it a chance and not be turned off. Like a black and white movie might turn off a modern audience. The OSR might turn off a modern role-playing audience. I don't know. The other reason is because I've actually never played past second edition because I left the hobby. And when I came back, it was a pandemic. And so really the basic rules, and well, I know the advanced rules, but they're the only rules I know. And so between the two of them, the basic rules work just better for audio medium because the rules light, that's it. That's it. Hello. I
appear to have a small person enter the room. Hello.
Hi.
When are you going to be on the show?
Oh, Andrew has already been on the show, haven't you? Oh, and let me unplug this so he can actually speak.
I know. I mean, my show. I know, Andrew. I know you've been on Roll to Save. When are you going to be on Manticore?
Would you like to be on Tale of the Manticore?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think some of the stuff at Tale of the Manticore you're probably not quite ready for yet, young man.
That's right. You can't actually listen to it for 10 years.
But you like D&D, don't you?
Mm-hmm.
What's your favourite type of character in D&D?
Fighter.
My guy.
Yeah.
Good for you.
I have a suggestion.
You have a suggestion?
So we do Goblins with Green, where we see who would win in a fight or out of our Heroes Unlimited characters.
Right. So yeah, Andrew's favourite system at the moment is Heroes Unlimited, and he's wanting to do an episode about who would win in the fight, him or his sister's character.
It was a giant hamster, I think, right?
Giant guinea pig, yes.
Guinea pig. I was close.
One thing about Tale of the Manticore, which I love, is you've said before, obviously, you're not aiming for comedy. It's not zany shenanigans. But one of the things I think the storytelling is tremendous, but it is also very clearly of an adult bent. You describe it as more Game of Thrones than Monty Python. Give us an example of what listeners could expect, why it's not a PG-13 podcast.
Okay. Yeah. I ended up sort of retroactively appending a little warning to my episode 0. Some listener had suggested I do that. Hadn't occurred to me when I started, but they were right, and so I did. There's graphic descriptions of violence. There's sound effects, which I think sometimes might sell the hits a little bit more strongly than you might at first imagine. I think some of the sound effects can be triggering. Maybe they're very graphic. I don't tend to do like sex in the show, partly because I think I would feel a bit weird if I was typing away. I don't know. If I was writing a novel, it would be okay, but I don't know. I guess I just haven't gone there, and I don't think I will. I might refer to it kind of happening off stage, as it were, but I don't think I'll get into any descriptions of that. I don't use profanity, which actually I've thought about a lot. Again, when I started, I was just trying to make it feel like my own D&D games from when I was a kid. A lot of violence, a lot of horror, but actually not really any sex and profanity. I don't know. That just wasn't the game I played. And so that's just kind of that's the groove I slipped into when I started making this, just to try and recapture the wonder and feel of actual classic gaming. But profanity, I don't know. There's a podcast called Turncloaks, and I think they use some profanity, and it does feel more realistic. It is more like grim dark. If you have the profanity as well, it seems more real, gritty, darker. And I don't do it. So yeah, I wonder if mine is a little bit cartoony compared to those ones. I don't know. Cartoony maybe doesn't describe
it's
what I do.
It's definitely not cartoony.
Yeah.
Given that I'm still in trauma about some of your episodes, it's definitely not.
Well, maybe one of them hit a little close to home for you, huh? Sorry about your character. We'll give you another one.
Can't believe you did that to me.
Yeah. No spoilers, though.
Such a low blow. Interesting what you say about profanity. I mean, I come from a country where we quite happily use profanity the same way other people use punctuation.
Sure.
Which I've deliberately avoided on the podcast because I don't want to have to slap an explicit label on it. Uh-huh. But there's some podcasts that I listen to that are actual plays, and when the characters start on the profanity, it almost feels like the kids that you used to have at school who would do it to try and be cool.
Sometimes it can take you out of the suspension of disbelief can be broken by that.
When you're doing pretendy fun time games with elves,
yeah,
modern day profanity doesn't always fit as well.
That's right. Yeah. Again, there's that show Turncloaks, and they did it well. But you're right. If you had an elf saying if you had an elf just like firing off a tirade of expletives, maybe that would yank you out of a fantasy if what you were going for was believable, dramatic, dark, gritty stuff. I guess it depends on the writer or the player. Mm-hmm. That's a tough one. I've kind of struggled with that one very specifically. Like, why don't I have profanity? There are a lot of situations which call for it. Actually, to be honest, there are a lot of times where I'm writing / playing the show, and that is what would happen. I think what would logically happen here, which is a question I'm just constantly asking: what would happen? What would happen? What would happen? And there are a lot of times where people would just absolutely go off that way. But now that I didn't start with that, it would be weird to suddenly introduce it. So I guess it's just not there.
What I'm very glad with, though, is you haven't done what some other people have done, is where and I get what they're trying to do, but when they introduce their own world profanity, it's made up elf words for profanity.
Right.
And it's almost like
Battlestar Galactica, right?
Yeah. Fracking this and
fracking
that.
That was bad. Yeah.
Yeah. It doesn't sit well, and it
doesn't work.
It feels almost like an in-joke amongst the cast, because you first hear it and you're like, what are these imbeciles saying?
Yeah.
And then it turns out that balunculus is actually the worst word in that particular kingdom. So talking about world building, you've obviously crafted your own world. You're not using Greyhawk or any of the D&D settings, and indeed you've got your own website where you're slowly adding to it. Listeners can go, they can see about the towns, they can see maps.
Yep.
Talk us through that. What goes on in that, and what inspires you to create the various things that you find along the way?
I guess I'm not using a published one because I never did. Actually, I never really gamed with one. Again, I've had them, but they were just to read, just as fuel for the imagination. Never played in Greyhawk or Forgotten Realms or anything like that. I always wanted to make it. Part of the fun for D&D for me is to make it. So why would I want to use someone else's ideas? I want to make it. And so that's why I just went with my own. And then there is a blog that I keep. It's guys, not much. It's basically just a trash heap of my random thoughts and as you say, like occasional maps and stuff. I do put the show notes there, which are like probably the most legitimate thing on the site and probably the least read. But I figured that, at least to give credit where it's due, I needed to publish the show notes somewhere. So that's what I originally started it for. And then, I'll throw up maps and character sheets or inventory sheets and wandering monster tables and stuff like that if people want to actually see the whole thing. But in terms of like generating the story, that's been a lot of the fun is making that world, and it's procedural, just like the story. So I started off with a blank piece of paper. I drew a forest on it. I thought, well, we'll start in a forest. That'll be good. Everything that gets added to that map only gets added because it comes up in the gameplay. Actually, people say, "Oh, where are you from?" "Oh, I'm from this city." "What city?" Briar Hill." "Okay, and now I have to put Briar Hill on the map somewhere. Actually, I remember for the first couple of months, it was a bit of a nightmare to negotiate what I had sort of said in the story to what existed on paper in terms of like distances that made sense. I wasn't going to go too obsessive over it, but I wanted it to make sense. So if I said, "Oh, it took me 2 days to get from A to B," I had to have a map with a scale that actually, reflected that. And so actually that was a little bit tough. After I got enough, I guess, points of data on that map or in that world, things started to become easier. But actually in the very beginning stages, that was actually quite a challenge. I think I had to redraw that map 5 or 6 times to make everything be in the right place.
I think that's something you learn as you get older when you run games. And that is that feeling of consistency.
Mm-hmm.
I know when I run games for friends and they're listening, this is me lifting back the curtain, I'm obsessively making notes while they're talking because, and it's not just to do if I've ruled one thing, I have to make sure that's consistently applied. But if something is mentioned, and like they are going to look up this place again, they're going to go and try and find that individual again, I need to make sure that I've written that down. Whereas I remember running games as a kid, and you're basically just in la la land where something that's been mentioned 2 minutes ago has probably been forgotten because you just want to get to the next fight with the next orc and take that guy down. Yeah. One thing I really like about your world building is the attention to detail you've given the characters, because essentially when your campaign starts, and we've agreed to not spoil anything, but you start with a bunch of first level characters.
Yeah.
As we all know who've played basic D&D, first level characters could be pretty generically boring. You've got a thief and a magic user that can't really do much magic, and a fighter and whatever. But you've given them all a sense of personality. And I think there's an element of cruelty in your part there by giving them the personality, because one thing that you mention right at the beginning of every single podcast that you do is that the dice absolutely rule the day. And if the dice say one of these characters die, they will die. The comparison to Game of Thrones is not that far off, because you have made some genuinely likable characters and then taken them away from us.
Yeah. It won't be spoiling to say that there have been character deaths. There
have been character deaths. And I think that's one of the best parts. So with your characters, take us through what you do in the character creation, but also who's your favorite character you've created, if you don't mind spoiling anything there.
Okay. That's a tough one because they're all mine. I'm picking a favorite child. Okay. For the character creation, I have a little homebrew system where I roll 3d6, and if anything less than a 5, I re-roll, just because, at least for player characters, I don't want anybody to have weaknesses that are extreme. I think they can make good NPC characters, but I think for my PCs, I'll stick with this. So they're just rolled straight up that way. And so because of the bell curve, they typically end up having pretty average characteristics. There are no superheroes. It could happen though, but so far no superheroes at all. And so they do start off really generic. I specifically wanted to represent one of every kind of major class when I started. So I did want to have one fighter, one magic user, one cleric, one thief, and then one other thing. It ended up being a dwarf at the time. And they are maybe a little bit cliched in their personalities to start. Typically, I'll give each character maybe 1 or 2 idiosyncrasies, characteristics, maybe a thing that they say more than once, just anything that's bold about them. Not necessarily bold in that sense, but I mean like underlined. So I'll have a character like Umura, who's a magic user. She has a habit of always tucking her hair behind her ears. And I just keep that in mind, that every now and then do that. And then maybe that will sort of over time build up a look and feel for this character. I'll have another character I try and give them different voices. This is something I learned early on, is I don't have a lot of voices in my head. So, oh boy, that was tough, especially when it came down to like accents and stuff. Oh boy, like what do I do about that? Anyway, for characters, that's kind of the creation process, is to give them one or two distinct idiosyncrasies, things, or a voice that's distinct. But then everything else actually does happen over time, and most of their personalities develop depending on what happens to them in game. So if there's an encounter with some kind of creature and they almost die, they should be affected by that in a real human way. And so maybe they would develop a phobia. Well, actually, I guess that hasn't happened exactly, but that would make sense, that kind of thing. And if somebody helped a character, they would have an affinity for that kind of thing. Anyway, the idea is that everything in the world is procedural, but everything in the characters is procedural too. It's organic, and I want the story to like have a life. Some points in that life are extinguished along the way, but but I want those characters to have a reason to go on, and a bit of verisimilitude, I guess, is the word I'm searching for here. Yeah.
So we've agreed to no spoilers. So let's do a cut-off point. In your first 10 episodes, what was your favorite moment? Because I know when you write things, sometimes they come out differently from how you mean. So what did you have in your first 10 episodes?
Okay.
Thought, oh wow, that was actually really good or really powerful. I've got a moment that I will share, but I'll let you go first.
Okay. God, this is a tough one. I don't have a favorite character. I was thinking about that while I was rambling. I don't have one. I'll tell you this, when they do die, I really feel it. I really do. The same way all players who play D&D feel it when their characters die. And just the fact that I have multiple ones doesn't really help. It really hurts every time. Okay, I'm going to have to pick the first character death. So I am going to spoil something now. So if
don't spoil it. Don't spoil it.
Should I not?
No, just say the first character death, but don't spoil it.
Okay, I'll say the first character death.
Because that got me, that one. I think I sent you an email about it. I was like, oh,
I remember that. So when that happened, and I say happened because it really does happen. I don't make it happen. The dice make it happen. And then I just try and interpret what's going on. When that happened, and I wrote about it, and then when it came together in the editing software, and I put I had kind of low blow sad piano music under there just to really, really, really milk it. I remember when I listened back to that the first time, I actually did feel something in my own heart, which is weird because it's my own thing. And so, like, typically if I make some music, I don't necessarily feel it. Maybe I should. Maybe that's telling me something. But this was one of the first times where I really made some kind of thing, some kind of art work, for lack of a better term, and actually like felt it back. And when I felt that, I thought, I wonder if there's a chance, if I can feel this, if someone else will feel this. And if that's the case, maybe I found something good. Not that I wanted a character to die, but maybe if I can sort of generate an emotional response in myself. God, that's a very weird thing to say. Doesn't it sound so masturbatory? All right, kids, go to bed. Well, if I can elicit that feeling in myself, I wonder if that is that the feeling when you know you've got something good. And so I thought, oh, maybe I've got something good here. And that every now and then, as I've been working through the show, I get there again. It's not every episode, but sometimes, and it's not always a sad event. Sometimes there are some moments of triumph as well, where I feel like this is it. Struck a chord that resonates in the right way, and I think I want to reach for this feeling as much as I can. I don't think you can do it all the time. Otherwise, it would just be overwhelming, right? You can't always be pushing the feels button. It has to be now and then. But I hope I can continue to get there in new ways, and not always through tragedy, but sometimes through triumph. Or one thing that's really hard to do, I think, for me would be, like, what if there's a situation where the characters look like they're going to die? It's really bad. And then what if I roll that natural 20 and it's exciting? That I think would be a hard one to communicate to the show, because the die rolls on my show, they're sampled die rolls.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just for consistency and sound quality. All the actual die rolling is real, but the ones that you hear in the show are sampled. And so when you hear me say, natural 20 on the podcast, that I'm reading from a script, because that originally did happen during the writing/playing stage. And so there's no way around it. I have to try and remember my excitement. Anyway, if there was that situation where the characters are in trouble and only a natural 20 can save them, what if I get it? What if I get that? I could just imagine any listener going, "Oh, come on. Are you really, do you really think I'm going to believe this?" So actually that's something that kind of...
I would counter that though, because I think you do a very good job with the combat to actually make it engaging. Because I've listened to other actual plays, and it may be that, like, I find 5th Ed D&D almost unnecessary complex. There's nothing that turns me off more than when I hear people talking about, I've got the ideal cleric build. I'm like, it's not a video game. Come on. But then you hear these combats, and I used to play a lot of military war games, and I'm thinking, this is getting into wargaming territory where people are putting together certain combos and, almost playing as a tactical war game, whereas you're essentially rolling a die and coming up with a number. I think with the combination of the music and the narration, it does make it engaging. And there's been a couple of moments, like one of my favorite moments, and again, no spoilers here, was when your party first come across the creations of one of the main villains. And it's their first encounter with them. And one moment in it really worked for me, when you've got a combat going on, and again, you're chucking a D20 and you're seeing who hits and who doesn't.
Yeah.
But where one of the characters, you just had a bit of voice acting, and he says to the rest of the party, "Get behind me." And I was like, that's brilliant. That fits the character perfectly. It fits the situation perfectly. It fits his personality perfectly. And the whole thing came together very, very well. And there was a real feeling at the end of that combat of, wow, something momentous has happened here. Ultimately, you've rolled a D20 a few times and checked off some boxes and stuff's happened, but it was very, very powerful. So I wouldn't undersell your capacity to engage your audience with narrating D&D combat. As I said, there's plenty of other people who make it needlessly complicated. The narrative element of what you do, I think, sells it very well. I would say another high point, because I mentioned before your sound effects, and you've mentioned before you're a musician. You described yourself to me once as being a gearhead. You love old technology to do with sound. There's a scene, no spoilers here, who it is or when it happens, but it's an execution scene. You just use a combination of sound effects to make it absolutely brutal to listen to. I know what you're talking about.
It's brutal for me.
Yeah, it's a certain sound effect you use while narrating what's happening. And I came away from that and I'm thinking that's hideous to listen to in a positive storytelling way. So with the whole musical aspect, how much of the music do you compose yourself? How much of it do you generate yourself? What's involved there?
About 50-50. And I'll probably try and get to 70% that I make myself. I think there's some that is just outside of my ability to do in a studio alone, like the introduction music. Yeah, the introduction music especially. And then there are a couple that I've sort of slated for sections. When I do the kind of the previously on, it's always the same music. It would be kind of weird to change that now. And then when I do like a character spotlight, I call it a dramatis personae, which, having listened to other podcasts now, I realize is very hackneyed. Oh, well, stuck with it now. I use a certain song or music for that as well that I didn't write. But for basically all of the narrative parts, not all, as much as I can, I'm trying to do my own. And at first it was just, I had a classical guitar nearby and I was thinking about the old Diablo game and how effective that soundtrack is. And I thought, I wonder if I can do something Diablo-esque. And so I kind of tried to do that and I missed, but I was happy enough with what I got anyway. And then I thought, I'm going for this basic OSR feel. I wonder if I can incorporate some like big fat analog synthesizer sounds and, conjure up some 80s vibes that way. And so I started doing that as well. And just recently, I've started using some virtual instruments like cellos and violins and stuff. And I'm not sure. Some of them sound a little bit synthetic. And so the classical guitar stuff, that's in there. The fat synthesizer stuff, that's in there. And lately I've been sort of bringing in a bit more in terms of like virtual instruments. But at present, they just sound a little too fake for me. And that always bothers me if I listen to music and I can tell that a violin is a fake violin. It bugs me. Every now and then I'll throw in some metal stuff too.
Well, if it's any consolation, when you and I were swapping adverts and I was going to get my wife to record the voiceover for mine and I played your advert and she looked to me and went, "You need to up your music game." Like, thanks.
The ad that I use is not music I wrote. That's the Danny Elfman-esque dun 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 dun. Yeah. Who does that one? Is it Scott Buckley? Oh, I forgot the name. How terrible of me.
I actually found a very good site of royalty-free music called Epidemic Sound. And I use a lot of, when I run Paranoia games, I use a lot of very distinctive sounds. I look for stuff that's essentially Muzak because it fits the feel.
Oh, of course, yeah.
I've got a funny feeling that Alpha Complex, there is zero creativity when it comes to music. And this seems to fit very, very well. But we'd gone through several adventures of this Muzak playing in the background. And I'll change it up every now and again. We started one game and the players are doing something completely banal, but I found this track in this royalty-free music site, and it's called something like "The Epic Battle Has Just Begun," and it's like something from a Michael Bay trailer. So I start narrating what they're doing, and they all just kind of stop because this like epic soundtrack surging in the background, and they're like, "Oh, I thought we were off to do something exciting." I'm like, "No, I thought I'd just try something different with the music."
This is just one more reason why you have to make this. You have to make this thing. Right? Well, I mean, it just gets better and better.
Well, speaking of that, so you obviously started playing old school games. You never really got beyond that. Are there any games out there that you've heard of in the RPG community that you would really like to play that you've never played?
Many. Because I spend more and more time listening. I still listen to a ton of podcasts. And actually, the more I find that I like, the harder it becomes to discover new stuff because I'm subscribed to a bunch of great shows. Yours, there's Chase, there's The Cast Perilous is another good one. I still listen to everything by the Iron Realm. Anyway, I could go on and on. Okay, the games that I really want to play are Mythic, which is a solo play one, and actually it's weird. I consider myself not a solo gamer. I know that's strange. I would like to try Mythic. I'd like to try Savage Worlds. That seems really, really cool. This one is going to sound super bizarre, but I'd like to try 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. But I kind of want to play that one live. I don't think I want to do that one on Roll20. I want to have the real experience because if I don't like it, I don't want to think, oh, it's because it was online.
Yeah.
I want to think it's because it's not for me.
I'm really glad you said that one because there's a tendency to assume that people will like OSR games or they'll like 5th Ed, and you can't like both. I own
absolutely,
both.
Yeah.
Jason, who's our co-host, he has played role-playing games for thousands of years because he's an ancient, decrepit old man. You'll love me for saying that, Jason. But he loves 5th Ed. So there's not this, I don't think there's this age gap between, oh, I'm over 40, therefore take away all copies of 5th Ed. I can only play basic red box D&D. I think 5th Ed, there's a lot of good stuff going for it. I know some people question Wizards of the Coast's business practices, and that's a whole different subject altogether. I think ultimately it's down to who you play with and what fun you have with it.
Yeah, there is this sort of perceived schism, right? You're either an OSR grognard or you're a normal person, I guess, is the alternative. And I'm sure there's a meridian that happens around 35 years old or something like that. I'm not sure. That's destructive, right? I mean,
absolutely.
I would say that anybody could really enjoy anything. It really comes down to a couple things. One, do you want rules light or rules heavy? But even then, some of the older stuff like Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, that's pretty old school, but it's also pretty crunchy stuff.
Oh, absolutely.
Maybe the difference is down to sort of like what level of heroicism do you want? Because it tends to be, and again, I'm generalizing, that the older stuff is more deadly and your characters are more likely to die. And so you probably don't invest as much into them, at least not initially. And so if you're a if you're a player that wants to do a big backstory and just imagine every facet of your character, maybe like newer gaming is better. You have a less chance of dying and having to rewrite that, 5-page bio. But if you're okay with characters dying and here's a game I want to try, Cthulhu, where the expectation is you die. How cool is that? That's so great. Then you can just try and die in the most amazing way possible. Anyway, if you're the kind of player who's okay with characters dying because you're about the bigger story instead of the character, then maybe OSR is better suited for that. Even saying it, I'm not sure that that's true outside of D&D. In D&D, that's true. Outside of D&D, I'm not really sure. But maybe that's the difference, right? Are you playing for the whole story, or are you playing for your character of the moment? Because there's a difference there, and both of them are fine and good, right? Both of them are good.
I used to run a lot of World of Darkness LARPs, mainly Vampire. One thing that you got, especially with Vampire, there was a lot of people who would invest a lot into their character to the extent of becoming somewhat florid when it came to it. And I remember having a discussion mid-2000s. We'd finished a game and there was a bunch of us down the pub chatting away about the game. Somebody had brought up D&D. There was a D&D game happening in a couple of weeks, and would anyone be interested in playing? And one of the players sort of sniffed and said, "Oh, you wouldn't catch me playing that." I was like, "It's a role-playing game. Why wouldn't you play it?" And he went, "It's not art, is it?" And I'm like, "Are you kidding? You think coming along once a month and kidding on to be a made-up vampire is art?
Yeah.
Really?" He's like, well, I write fiction based on this. I'm like, I'm sure there's plenty of people that write fiction based on their D&D characters. Do not take that stance that yours is somehow better because you get to wallow in your inner beast and the dark angst of your soul, which, by the way, you don't do a very good job of. Those games tended to attract some people with a lot of pretensions. It's probably the
I never LARPed. It fascinates me. I'll be honest.
The interesting thing, we're actually going to do an episode on Vampire LARP because all of us on the podcast used to do it. I've never done LARP in terms of the sword and sorcery, running around the field with a rubber sword, whacking people with it. Vampire LARPs are much more akin to a bunch of really snide people at a secondary school spreading gossip about each other. There's actually very little combat or violence. It's all very, very political, and occasionally something kicks off. But the fun of it is just the sheer machinations involved. People will take a year to make something happen, and then it finally does happen, and there's a huge payoff, and it's all great. It can also be terrible. I've played in some awful Vampire LARPs. I will not name any of them because I'm a mature adult, but there are certain people there that think the best way to attract people to a game is to let them play whatever they want. That is a surefire way to get the monster of the week players turning up. The people who equate playing Last of a Dying Race as playing something that's very flavorful and characterful. But that's a whole different podcast that we're going to go down because we have so many horror stories. You mentioned music before. What other things do you do apart from gaming? Do you have any other projects in the pipeline? Anything we should know about? Anything you want to brag about here that we can direct people to?
Yeah, no, I do other things, but it's nothing that your listeners, I think, would be very interested in. I make guitar pedals, and I dabble in like electronics design and stuff like that. But again, it's totally separate from what I do with Manticore. Another sort of outlet for some very mild OCD tendencies I have, I think. Just something of like, something I can spend 4 hours doing with a big magnifying glass visor on my face. But it's a non-D&D. I do have a game going on where I'm a player. That's just, I guess everybody's got one or more of those going right now. For me, it's kind of nice to be in the passenger seat for that one, to be honest, because it's all I do is show up once a week for 4 hours, play a single character, and make room for everybody else to do their thing. And it's kind of very low impact D&D, whereas Tale of the Manticore tends to dominate my thoughts, but in a good way. Like there are really no days where I'm not thinking about the story or what might happen and rejecting ideas and coming up with new ideas and taking notes and shoving them in my pockets. And other things going on? Not really. I'm trying to survive being a high school teacher in a pandemic. That's taking up a lot of mental energy. And I'm trying to get my apartment to not look too much like a warehouse.
So my final question before we go, you mentioned this right at the beginning.
Yeah.
What episode is it that you're ashamed of and why?
Boy, you are good. Remember you said you were taking notes as a DM?
Making notes right here, my friend.
Here's my great shame. And I've debated whether I should fix this. You know what? I'm going to ask your advice. I'm going to ask your advice for something. So in my very first episode, I talk a little bit about Tale of the Manticore and what I'm trying to accomplish. And I sort of dunk on comedy D&D, talking about gnome samurais and blah, blah, blah. Okay. And then I mention, there won't be any dwarves named Grog, and there won't be any half-orcs named Grog, and there won't be anybody named Grog. My sort of ignorance of the RPG scene was so complete when I wrote that I didn't realize that there was a critical role character named Grog. And so people, when they hear it, they think that I'm specifically slamming critical role, which I wasn't. I actually just was trying to think of the worst name I could think of, which I guess I am slamming it. I just wasn't intending to. So my big shame is that in my episode 0, I have this thing which is almost sure to alienate, 50 to 80% of my potential audience going forward, because Critical Role is beloved like nothing else, right? I mean, people love it. For me, I've tried. I can't get into it. I've listened to the first episode like 7 times. I can't do it. I understand that people like it. I understand that Matt Mercer is a very talented guy. But every now and then I think, should I go back and edit that out? Because I didn't mean to go after this individual in any kind of nasty way, but I did. I kind of did. So should I don't know, what do you think? Should I go back and take it out?
Absolutely not. I think Grog's a terrible name. No offense to anyone. Please, no scorpions in the post. It's all pretendy fun time games. Also, I love your stance on gnomes. I've been involved in these debates online. Gnomes are the worst thing you can introduce. What I find, and I'm going off on a bit of a personal rant here, but whenever I listen to a podcast, sometimes happens with halflings, it always happens with gnomes. People who play little people characters feel the need to be utterly irritating. They'll put on a stupid voice and they'll get up to quote unquote antics.
Yeah.
Even before podcasting was a thing, people who I played with who would play these characters would feel the need to essentially make one of Santa's little helpers who happens to be adventuring in this kingdom and has a whiny voice and gets into antics that gets the rest of us into trouble. If you have a scene where there's a gnome who's dying and your party refuses to help them because they realize the potential for irritation, please include that.
You're gonna voice that gnome.
The important thing is that the gnome dies alone and in pain and is unloved.
Right, a lot of pain. That's no sad piano music for that gnome.
No sad piano, joyous music. I'll give you some of my paranoia music.
Some triumphant music.
Yeah, you can play that. You give your warning at the beginning of your podcast. There's going to be much pain in the days ahead. That gnome needs to have the majority of that pain.
That's right. With the girl from Ipanema playing in the background.
This gnome is dying. That would work.
All right. I'll tell you, if we ever do encounter a dying gnome, Well, I'll make sure to make it extra grisly.
Brilliant. Yeah, I want that. That's going to be like an R-rated episode.
We'll flay that gnome.
Fantastic. Well, John, listen, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on here. I've wanted to get you in the podcast for a while. So thank you again for coming on here, and hopefully we'll speak to you again soon.
Thank you for having me, and I'm sorry for ruining your podcast.
And that was our interview with John, the writer, producer, and performer of the Tale of the Manticore podcast. We hope you enjoyed it, and if you don't already listen to it, we hope you'll check it out. You can find John on Twitter at Manticore Tale. That's tale as in story, not as in thing that a dog wags. See? It's a pun. As John alluded to earlier, we're considering putting together a Paranoia actual play podcast. If you're interested in putting yourself through this torture, that is to say, if you're interested in participating, please send us a message on Twitter at SavePodcast. You can also email us at roll.2.save.pod@gmail.com or find us on Facebook by searching for Roll to Save. Thanks for listening, and we hope you have a great and safe festive season and a happy new year. See you next time.
Are you looking for a D&D podcast with a dark side? Something more like Game of Thrones and less like Monty Python? Tale of the Manticore is part dark fantasy audio drama, part solo D&D RPG. There's no plot armor here. The dice make all the important decisions. Join me as I resurrect the excitement, wonder, and emotion of old school D&D. Made for a mature audience, Tale of the Manticore is both a fiction and a game. It's the story where chaos rolls.